Iran is in every headline. Conflicts, threats, hidden alliances, nuclear ambitions. But what few people know is that its story is already written in the Bible, its origin, and also its end. Yes, Iran appears in the Bible, from Genesis to the end-time prophecies. But it is mentioned by its ancient name, Persia. Because the Bible not only tells of the creation of Iran, it also foretells its final destiny in one of the darkest and most feared passages of Revelation, the war of Gog and Magog, a coalition that will rise against Israel in the last days. But before becoming a prophetic enemy, Persia was the empire chosen by God to set his people free, rebuild the temple, and fulfill the prophecies of Daniel. Stay with us to the end, because today you're going to discover something few dare to teach: the true role of Iran in God's plan, from the beginning to the end. Let's begin. It all starts in the book of Genesis. After the flood, God gave humanity a new beginning and revealed how the nation of Persia came to be. Noah and his family were the only survivors on earth, and his 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, became the fathers of all nations. In chapter 10, we find the first map of the nations of the earth. These are the generations of the sons of Noah, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Sons were born to them after the flood. From these, the coastlands of the nations were separated into their lands, each according to his language, according to their families, into their nations. This is the genealogical map of Noah's sons, and here we discover the 2 patriarchs from whom the Persian Empire would be born, Magi and Elam. Magi, son of Japheth, became the ancestor of the Medes, a people who would dwell in the northern mountains of the region that today forms part of Iran. From the northern mountains of Iran, Magi's descendants began to expand, founding villages, clans, and tribes. They were independent, rugged mountain people, known for their resistance and tribal organization. Magi is the direct forefather of the ancient northern heart of Iran. The second name is Elam, son of Shem. His descendants, the Elamites, settled in the southwest of Iran in the fertile lands near the Persian Gulf. But in Genesis 14 we read of the first great international war in the Bible. 4 kings from the east, including Chedorlaomer, king of Elam, formed an alliance to invade Canaan. They plundered cities, enslaved peoples, and took Lot, Abraham's nephew, as a prisoner. Elam was no insignificant tribe. It was a rising power, and according to the Bible, it was the first nation to attack the people of faith. But Abraham didn't stand idle. With only 318 trained servants, he pursued the invaders by night, defeated them, rescued Lot, freed the captives, and humiliated the kings of the east. It was an impossible victory, one that defied all human logic, and it sent a clear message: no power from the east can prevail against those who have the favor of God. But the people of Elam did not vanish. Centuries passed, generations were born and died, and those defeated tribes grew in number. The Elamites and the Medes shared the same soil, ancient eastern Mesopotamia, Elam in the fertile southwest plains, and the Medes in the harsh northern mountains that forged their warrior character. And while empires rose and fell, a new power was quietly forming, first as clans, then as kingdoms, and finally as an empire, the Persian Empire. And though they were pagan nations, they were not outside of God's plan. The prophets Isaiah and Jeremiah gave 2 great prophecies about them. The first, through Isaiah, declared that God would use Elam and Media as instruments to punish Babylon, the empire that had destroyed Jerusalem and burned the temple. Babylon would not go unpunished, and God had already decided who would strike it down: the united peoples of Iran. But the second prophecy was even more astonishing. God would not only use Persia to punish, he would use it as his tool for liberation. Through the mouth of the prophet Isaiah, God announced that a pagan Persian king, not yet born, would be his chosen instrument to free the people of Israel from exile and to order the reconstruction of the temple in Jerusalem. Isaiah even called him by name more than 150 years before his birth. Thus says the Lord to his anointed, to Cyrus. And both prophecies were fulfilled with terrifying accuracy. In the 7th century BC, the first Median king Deioces united the tribes of Elam and Madai, founding the first imperial capital in Iranian territory, Ecbatana. His grandson King Cyrus took the next great step. He reformed the army, and turned it into a war machine that destroyed Nineveh, the capital of the Assyrian Empire, one of Israel's most brutal enemies. The prophecy was beginning to unfold. God was raising Persia from within as his instrument of judgment and redemption. But as Persia grew in power, God had already revealed its destiny in prophetic dreams. And a young Hebrew captive in Babylon was the first to see it, Daniel. It all began when the Babylonian army, led by King Nebuchadnezzar, entered Jerusalem. The walls fell, the temple was plundered, and thousands were taken as slaves to foreign lands. Among them was Daniel, a mere teenager, ripped from his home and carried off as a slave to the royal court of Babylon, the most powerful empire of that time. But in the midst of that darkness, God chose him. Surrounded by the corrupt splendor of the palace, Daniel would become the vessel of divine revelation. Daniel did not defile himself, and because of that faithfulness, God gave him something he had given to no other captive, the gift of visions. These were not just visions of his own time, but revelations that unveiled the course of all history. From the heart of the empire that had destroyed Jerusalem, Daniel began to see how God would raise another empire, one that would replace Babylon and play a pivotal role in the destiny of his people, the Empire of Persia, and it was all announced in dreams. While Daniel served in the court of Nebuchadnezzar, the king was deeply troubled by a terrifying dream. A giant statue made of different metals stood before him, radiant yet ominous. Disturbed and afraid, the king demanded not only an interpretation, but that someone reveal the dream without hearing it first. None of Babylon's wise men could do it. But God had prepared his prophet. Daniel was brought before the king, and with the authority of heaven, he stood before the most powerful man on earth and revealed what no other could. He described the dream with perfect accuracy and delivered a revelation that would change the destiny of the world. You, O king, are the head of gold. But after you another kingdom will arise, inferior to yours, represented by the chest and arms of silver. That silver figure was not a single nation, but two arms, two powers joined into one body, the Medes and the Persians, united but not equal, for the Persian arm would rise stronger and take the lead. The prophecy was clear. Babylon would fall and the throne would pass to a new empire, one chosen by God. The young Daniel, a foreigner in a strange land, was witnessing with his own eyes the unfolding of God's dreams, and soon his visions would become reality. Because the king whom God had announced through Isaiah many years before was about to rise in the highlands of Persia. His name was Cyrus. Cyrus, the young Persian king, conquered Media, united the kingdoms, and formed the Medo-Persian Empire. Little by little, it became the greatest power of its time, until finally Cyrus set his eyes on Babylon. The prophesied day arrived. But it was not a war like any other. One night, King Belshazzar, the grandson of Nebuchadnezzar, held a great banquet surrounded by 1,000 nobles. In the midst of wild revelry, he committed an unforgivable act. He ordered that the sacred vessels, stolen by his grandfather from the temple in Jerusalem, be brought forth, and they drank from them in honor of false gods. Suddenly an invisible hand wrote on the palace wall 4 mysterious words, Mene, Mene, Tekel, Parsin. The king turned pale. No one could interpret the writing until they summoned Daniel. And Daniel revealed, God has numbered your kingdom and brought it to an end. Your kingdom will be divided and given to the Medes and the Persians. Even as the words were spoken, the prophecy was already being fulfilled. The armies of Cyrus the Great, king of Persia, had diverted the Euphrates River and entered silently through its dry riverbed. The gates were left open. God himself had opened them. That very night Belshazzar was killed, and the prophecy was fulfilled. Babylon fell to Persia. The Jews, who had wept for 70 years by the rivers of Babylon, witnessed the impossible. A foreign pagan king decreed their return to Jerusalem. But Cyrus didn't just allow their return. He financed the reconstruction of the temple and sent Israel's leaders with royal support. Zerubbabel, descendant of David's royal line, and Joshua the high priest would be the first to lay the foundations. And at last, the place where God's name dwelled would rise again. Persia became the only nation in history not to destroy Israel, but to restore it. But God gave Daniel another vision of Persia, even more astonishing. In his first vision, Daniel saw 4 monstrous beasts rise from the chaos of the sea. The second was a gigantic bear, raised up on one side with 3 ribs between its teeth. A voice thundered from heaven, "Arise and devour much flesh." The bear represented the empire that would follow Babylon, Media and Persia. But it was raised on one side because Persia would dominate over Media, and the 3 ribs were its most fearsome conquests: Lydia, Babylon, and Egypt, each devoured in unstoppable expansion. And this vision was fulfilled with chilling precision. After conquering Lydia in Asia Minor and Babylon, Persia advanced toward Egypt. Under the rule of Cambyses II, son of Cyrus, the Persian armies crossed the Sinai Desert and defeated Pharaoh Psamtik III at the Battle of Pelusium. Egypt, the ancient oppressor of Israel, fell to the Persian Empire, and so the 3rd rib was torn out. But the visions weren't over. Years later, while standing by the Ulai River, Daniel was taken into another vision, clearer, more terrifying, and more specific. Before his eyes appeared a ram with 2 horns. But one horn was taller than the other, and it rose later. The ram charged westward, northward, and southward, and no one could stand against it. Then a voice explained, "The ram you saw with 2 horns represents the kings of Media and Persia." Once again, Persia appears at the center of God's divine plan, but this time not as an ally but as an unstoppable conquering empire, charging like a raging beast. And the detail is chilling. 1 horn higher than the other, a direct reference to Persia's supremacy over the Medes. 2 peoples, 1 empire, but only 1 dominant throne. The vision continued. Suddenly from the west appeared a swift goat, moving like the wind with a single horn between its eyes. In an instant it struck the ram, shattered it, and trampled it underfoot. This was the prophecy of the next empire. Greece, led by Alexander the Great, would defeat Persia with supernatural speed. At that moment, Daniel did not know who this goat was, but he saw that Persia, the most vast and glorious empire the world had seen, would one day fall. But that ending had not yet come. For in its days of glory, Persia was not only invincible, it was the center of the world. Its dominion stretched from India to the west, and its influence reached every corner of civilization. Would you like me to continue the rest of this narrative until the transition to the end-time role of Persia, Iran, in prophecy? Even to Ethiopia, and in the days of King Ahasuerus, the throne of the greatest empire on earth was established in the majestic city of Susa, at the heart of Elam, what we now know as southwestern Iran. And it was in Susa where one of the most unexpected miracles in all of biblical history took place, because the great empire would be conquered by a single woman. Centuries later, when the world awaited in silence the arrival of the Messiah, Persia reappeared in the Gospel of Matthew. We read a passage that has been repeated millions of times, but rarely understood in its depth. Magi from the east came to Jerusalem, saying, "Where is he who has been born King of the Jews? For we saw his star in the east and have come to worship him." Who were these Magi, and why did they come from so far? Only for a sign. The word used, Magi, Greek magoi, refers to wise men, astronomers, and priests from the east. Although the text does not directly mention their nationality, all indications point to their coming from the ancient lands of the Medo-Persian Empire, the region we now know as Iran. The Magi were part of a highly influential religious caste in Persia, known for their knowledge of the stars, ancient scriptures, and inherited prophecies. They were not kings, but men of science, authority, and spiritual wisdom. It is very likely that among the scrolls they studied were the writings of the prophet Daniel, who had served in the courts of Babylon and Persia centuries before. Daniel not only interpreted dreams in the court of King Nebuchadnezzar, but also prophesied the coming of the Messiah with mathematical precision in Daniel 9. From the time the word goes out to restore and rebuild Jerusalem until the Anointed One, the ruler, comes, there will be 7 sevens and 62 sevens. And if these wise men knew Daniel's visions, they likely knew that the time of the Messiah was near. And when they saw the star, they understood the promised son had been born. But the most astonishing part is what they did. They left everything behind, following the star, crossing deserts, and arriving in Bethlehem with 3 gifts, each carrying prophetic meaning: gold, recognizing his royalty; frankincense, recognizing his divinity; and myrrh, anticipating his sacrifice and death. Unknowingly, they proclaimed the greatest mystery of the universe. This child would be a king, he would be God, and he would be the Lamb. While the wise men of Jerusalem remained silent and Herod sought to kill him, it was the wise men from the east who were the only ones to recognize the prophecies and come to the Messiah. That moment was not a coincidence. It was a prophetic act. Persia, the same nation that centuries earlier had liberated Israel and rebuilt its temple, was now the first to recognize its savior. Once again, Persia became an instrument of divine revelation. From the beginning to the cradle of Christ, Iran, the ancient Persia, has always been interwoven with God's plan. But the story of Iran in the Bible does not end in Bethlehem, because while Persia was once an instrument of redemption, it will also be part of one of the darkest episodes of prophetic future. God not only revealed Persia's beginning, he also announced its end. And he did it through the prophet Ezekiel in one of the most feared visions of the Old Testament, the war of Gog and Magog. In chapter 38, Ezekiel describes a coalition of nations that in the last days will rise up against restored Israel, the people of God. Son of man, set your face against Gog, of the land of Magog, the chief prince of Meshech and Tubal. Prophesy against him and say, "This is what the sovereign Lord says, I am against you, O Gog." And among the nations listed, Persia, Cush, and Put will be with them. Persia, modern-day Iran, is one of the first names mentioned. The very nation that once helped rebuild the temple will become part of a military alliance against the people of God. But who are these other allies? Gog, leader of Magog, widely interpreted as a ruler from the northern regions, often associated with Russia or a Eurasian coalition. Cush, ancient Nubia, possibly parts of modern Sudan. Put, linked to North Africa, possibly Libya. Gomer and Togarmah, regions near Turkey and the Caucasus. Together they form a global force that Ezekiel says will descend on Israel like a storm. You will come like a storm, you and all your troops and many nations with you. You will cover the land like a cloud, but they will not succeed. This attack will provoke the direct intervention of God, and his judgment will be devastating. Earthquakes, fire, confusion among the troops, and the manifestation of God's glory amid the chaos. It is written, "I will magnify myself and sanctify myself, and I will be known in the eyes of many nations. Then they will know that I am the Lord." Thus Persia will go from being a redeemer to being judged, not because God forgot it, but because it will once again rise against his will and against his people. Few nations in the Bible trace such a complete arc through sacred history as Persia, from its creation in Genesis, to its role during the exile, to its prophetic alliance in the final war. But what does the Bible say about its final destiny? Will it be destroyed forever, or will it be offered a chance for redemption? The answer is hidden between the lines, and it's more complex and more powerful than many imagine. After describing the judgment of Gog and Magog in Ezekiel 38 and 39, the text paints a scene of devastation. The army that rose against Israel will be destroyed by fire from heaven. Corpses will cover the land, weapons will burn for 7 years, and the name of Gog will forever be associated with divine judgment. Persia, as part of that coalition, will not escape punishment. But here something astonishing happens, because the prophet Jeremiah had already announced it centuries before in a nearly forgotten passage. The word of the Lord came to the prophet Jeremiah concerning Elam. "I will break the bow of Elam, the mainstay of their might. But in the latter days I will restore the fortunes of Elam, declares the Lord." Jeremiah 49:35-39. It is a dual prophecy. First comes judgment, but then we read an unexpected promise. "In the last days I will restore Elam." This changes everything, because even though Iran may rise against Israel in the end times, even though it may take part in the final assault that provokes God's wrath, its story does not end in ashes. Even in judgment, God leaves the door of redemption open. The Iran we see in today's headlines, aggressive, defiant, shrouded in dark alliances, will also be part of a restored world. The biblical story of Persia is a mirror of redeemed humanity, fallen, judged, but restored by grace. And that's why the final destiny of Iran, according to the Bible, is both a warning for the empires that defy God and a promise for those who repent. Because it is written, "In the last days the nations will go up to Jerusalem to worship the King, the Lord of hosts, and it shall come to pass, that everyone who survives of all the nations that came against Jerusalem shall go up year after year to worship the King and to celebrate the Feast of Tabernacles. Zechariah 14:16. Perhaps among those nations will be Elam. Perhaps Iran, once a redeemer, later an enemy, then judged, will also become a witness to restored glory. Because in the heart of God, there is still room for those who return. From the first pages of Genesis to the shaking visions of Revelation, Persia has been there. When humanity emerged from the waters of the flood, God named Elam and Magi, silently planting the seed of a future empire. When Abraham rose to rescue Lot, Elam was already a threat. When Babylon fell, Persia was God's instrument of redemption. When the temple was rebuilt, it was a Persian king who funded it. When the Messiah was born, it was the wise men from Persia who were the first to recognize him. And when the last days draw near, and nations rise like a shadow against Israel, Persia will appear once more, but this time on the dark side of prophecy. For it is written, Persia, Cush, and Put will be with them, a coalition against the restored people of God. But even then, the book is not closed. Scripture does not shut the door. And one day the nations will go up to Jerusalem to celebrate the King. If Persia turns its face back to God, its story will not end in destruction but in glory. And now, after everything you've heard, I ask you, do you believe Iran is fulfilling its prophetic role today? Are we living in a time when ancient prophecies are silently coming to life? And where do you think we are in this story? Do you see signs of these prophecies in today's headlines? Leave a comment below, like the video if you want us to continue. Share it with someone who needs to hear this, and click the video on screen now to watch. The 7 keys from Daniel to identify the Antichrist. Because Daniel left behind the signs, and in times like these, understanding is more vital than ever. Blessings.